Okay, so we're recording now. Today's agenda will be to talk about checkboxes. We'll do 3 versions of checkboxes. Then you'll have a lab which has some checkboxes and some radio buttons. We have to, and I have been dragging my feet, we have to schedule this first test that will have 2 parts. It will not be next Thursday because I've heard pilot test, right?
Yeah.
So sometime either the next week and the following week, some combination will be a 2-day test. And I hope tomorrow to figure out my calendar and put those dates down, and I'll send out an announcement when I do. It will definitely cover labs 1 through 7, possibly 8, definitely not 9. So 9 is for sure not on it. 1 through 7 is definitely on it, and 8 I have to make up my mind. What else? So when I decide when those tests are, then labs 1 through 7 or 8, depending, will be due by the end of the day of the second test, the second part of the test. But you should do it before the first part of the test because you're allowed to use your labs. You're allowed to use whatever you wrote, whatever I wrote, whatever you find on the internet. It's a very sort of open test. It will be a lab scenario. You will write a program that does the following. Homework 5 is not something that's due on the day of the test, but it is different parts of an old test 1. So it is worth doing before that time, but not required for you to do before that time. You can do it later and still receive full credit. But it will give you an idea of like what my test might be like. And it should be the skills we've been doing. Have radio buttons decide this, and if they don't choose a radio button, toast up something, and if they change the radio button, clear something out, and just I'll do what I've been doing. So it should be, I think, straightforward, but we'll see. Anything else I have to say about tests? Don't think so. You guys have been asking, but if you have any questions, now's the time to ask. I mean, you can continue to ask, but just so questions on test. Not at this time. Okay. Any questions on labs that you're having trouble finishing that you want to be asked sort of on the recording? No. Okay, so then we'll go over the checkbox examples of the day, and then we'll have time for individual questions as I run around. You can meet me if the time after class is not enough for you to get all of your questions answered, then we can meet in the lab. You can email me code and say, can you find the mistake? We can Zoom. There are all kinds of ways for us to meet. So sort of no excuses for doing poorly. I want you to do well, so take advantage. So I'm asking you to take advantage of me. That's weird. All right. Download the checkbox. Okay. So we've been doing like a tour of widgets, and this is one more stop on the tour of widgets so that we can interface with users. And we played with radio buttons and spinners, and they both sort of serve a similar purpose, and then they allow you to choose one thing. And checkboxes are going to allow a user to choose multiple things. So I'm going to make a copy of, I had a working here, hello world, and go into the resources, layout, activity, code, paste it in there, and then let me do the main activity, but not the package. Main activity, but not the package. Okay. So what this guy does now is gives you a bunch of checkboxes, and then which are possible hobbies that a person might have, and then the person will check what hobbies they have. So if you're into painting and home brewing, maybe at the same time, have some interesting paintings, and hiking, then it tells you your hobbies. If you choose a new hobby, it clears it out. If you take away a hobby, it clears it out. Okay. So in the first version of this, it's sort of three versions of the same thing. In the first version, the checkboxes are there in what I call design, in the layout, in the XML. So I have, the only weird thing that you might not have seen before in terms of design is these three columns. And so I'll show you how we did that. I have a, let's show this. I have the children, if you will, the children of constraint layout are a horizontal linear layout, a button, and a text field. So those are the children, the direct children of the constraint layout, and those are the things that must be constrained. You must say where they are left-wise or right-wise or start-wise and stop-wise, or I think it's end. So you've got to constrain them horizontally and vertically. Then within this horizontal, by saying it's a horizontal linear layout, that means the things within it get arranged horizontally. So within the horizontal linear layout, I have three vertical linear layouts. And then anything you put in a vertical linear layout gets put down vertically. So there are my three. So here there's a container, and then there's three other containers, and they're arranged. The first one said to arrange things within it horizontally, so those three containers are arranged horizontally. And then those are vertical containers, so the things in them get arranged vertically, and what's in them are checkboxes. So that's how I got my columns here. All right, now go back over to code. So there was a linear layout. That is a container, so there should be a closed linear layout. There's its closed way down there. Then there's a second linear layout that's inside the first one, and it should have a close. Container should have an open and a close tag. Sometimes when you drag them out first, they sort of do a self-close thing. And then if you put something in them, they should have an open and a close tag. But sometimes you get caught in some weird limbo where your container doesn't know that it should have an open and a close tag. Okay, but here's the outer linear layout, which is horizontal. Here's the first of the inner linear layouts, which is vertical. And then here's a checkbox in it. And I said that this hobby corresponded to sports. And I've labeled the checkboxes check hobby 1, check hobby 2. That's going to make it convenient for me to loop through them. There are other ways to loop through it. I could sort of say, give me all the widgets in my app, and if they're start looping through all the widgets, and then if any of the widgets are checkboxes, do blah blah blah. So I could make a way. There's always a way to loop through the checkboxes, no matter what their sort of ID, whatever ID I give them. But it's more convenient if I label them myself systematically. So I've got them called check hobby 1, check hobby 2, check hobby 3. That'll make it easier for me to loop through them, but there are other ways to loop through them if you didn't give them this systematic name. Okay, so that is the design. Again, there was what? A linear layout, which was horizontal, 3 linear layouts, which were vertical, a bunch of checkboxes inside, which are checkboxes. Outside of all those linear layouts is a button and a text view. Okay. So that is the, there was nothing in values. There will be later, but there isn't nothing now. There's nothing in drawable. And let's go to the main activity. So here is my button. Here is my text view for the hobby. And I'm giving the checkboxes and a handler, and that handler is for clearing. So right now I have some hobbies chosen and displaying, and if I say that I'm interested in Pokemon, it clears it out. So that's going to be a checkbox event handler. And so this is what I'm doing here. I'm looping through all the checkboxes to assign them an event handler. So I set up a loop that goes from 1 to 18. I should have gone from 0 to 17, but you know, I wasn't a good computer scientist that day. So I'm going from 1 to 18. I'm constructing that name, check hobby 1, check hobby 2, check hobby 3. I'm constructing that name. And then I am using resources get identifier. I am looking for that name within the IDs, within the package namespace. That's going to give me an ID. When I have the ID, that will be the ID of a checkbox. I'm finding it and I'm casting it as a checkbox. And then I'm giving it a sort of a checkbox change event listener, handler, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's here. So all of my checkboxes, if they're checked, are going to call this function, which is going to clear out my results. Okay, here I am in the button. I start off with an empty string, which is a quote, and that's where I'm going to put my hobbies as I find any hobbies that are checked. Here's me again, looping through 1 to 18, creating the name of the checkbox, check hobby 1, check hobby 2, going to finding its corresponding ID, finding that checkbox, casting it as a checkbox, and then asking if it's checked. So that's a property of checkbox, or is a Boolean property. Is it checked or is it not checked? So is my checkbox checked? If it is, then I'm going to add plus equal, add to my hobbies, the text of that checkbox, cast as a string and a little space so that they're not all jammed up against one another. When I'm done the loop, I'm going to say if the hobbies is still blank, I'm going to say get a hobby. And otherwise, I'm going to display your hobbies. So if I didn't have any hobbies, it says get a hobby. If I have a hobby, there's my hobby. Check boxes, you can have multiple things. All good? Yes, he says yes. Okay. So the next step, version 2, I'm going to make the checkboxes dynamic. So like we did with the radio buttons on that one homework, I'm going to have a container for the checkboxes, which are my linear layouts that are already there. So I'm going to have some container to put the checkboxes in, but I'm not going to have the checkboxes. I'm going to add them on the fly. I'm going to add them dynamically. I'm going to add them in the main activity.kt. Okay. So version 2. So here I have a string array in resources of hobbies. So I'm going to paste that. Over here, I have values, I have strings. I'm going to paste that in there. There are the strings. I have hiking twice, so I'm going to make it biking. There we go. So there is one thing that is my list of hobbies. Okay. Here's my activity main. I took the checkboxes out. Otherwise, it's the same. And so I'm over here in activity main, in code. I'm going to get rid of all the checkboxes. There it is, no checkboxes. Go to design. You don't see much of anything because I have linear layouts within linear layouts, but there's nothing in them. So there's nothing showing at this stage. And then the main activity, all but the package. Main activity. All but the package. Okay. I'm going to stop it and start it. It does the same thing, but let's prove it. I think that the hobbies may be rearranged. So I'm going to go gardening and antiquing and drawing. Okay, those are my hobbies. If I add Pokemon, if I take out antiquing, okay. So functions the same way, but the checkboxes are being added dynamically based on that list that we had in the resource array. Okay. So here we are in code. Connect to the button, connect to the text view. I'm getting a code version of my hobbies. So I had a resource array called hobbies, and now I'm making a code version of my hobbies. Now, here's one thing different from when we added the radio buttons dynamically. When we added the radio buttons dynamically, we didn't have to worry about their IDs, because when you interact with radio buttons, you really interact with the radio group. So the radio group sort of handles everything for you. It does, so the events really belong to the radio group. And it does all the work for you to make sure that only one of them is chosen. Now we just have a dumb container, a linear layout. I mean, it's smart enough to say go horizontal or go vertical, but it's not as smart as a radio group. And so we're going to need to be able to access our checkboxes. We're going to have to be able to ID them. So when we're adding checkboxes, we're going to assign them an ID. In a way, this is going to make our life easy compared to some things we do, because we're going to work with IDs and not names. When we worked with multiple seek bars, we knew their names, and then we had to convert their names into IDs and then get them based on their ID. Right now, we're going to assign these things dynamically. We're going to assign them an ID, an actual ID, not a name. not something that over design is called an ID, but is really a name, but an ID, which is a number. And so that's going to make our life easy, but we just have to remember to do it. So I'm going to, I was just, I don't know, being paranoid. I was afraid to assign IDs like 0, 1, 2, 3. I thought, you know, those might be special. And so I just made up some number 5,000 and I'm going to start at 5,000 rather than start at 0. I just figured that will be some number that, you know, I'm allowed to use that the system hasn't claimed for whatever reason. I don't know what numbers the system does claim, but I'm just hoping that it's not 5,000, 5,001, 5,002, etc. Okay. The other difficulty I've given myself is these columns. I want to arrange my hobbies into not one container, but 3 containers. So before with the radio buttons, we had a radio group and we just threw radio buttons into it and we didn't have to worry about identifying them because the group did everything, all the work for us. But we also just had one column of radio buttons. Now we're going to have checkboxes in 3 columns. So I had to do a little work there. Okay. So this is me establishing the outer linear layout. So this is the horizontal linear layout. So I called it LL hobbies, linear layout for the hobbies. It's the horizontal one, it's the outer one. And I'm asking it, how many children do you have? The linear layout had 3 children, which were also linear layouts, which were vertical. So the answer is 3. How many children do you have? 3. Okay. Now I'm looping through a hobby array. List, array, I don't know, one of them. Okay. So here is a way to, but I want a counter. So I'm going from I in the range 0 until hobbies.size. When you say until, you're not going to get the hobby size. So if there were 6 hobbies, it would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We wouldn't get to 6. Okay, because there's always one, because you start at 0, there's always one less here. Until knows that and takes care of it for you. Okay. So I'm instantiating a checkbox. I'm setting its text to the text of the hobby or what's from the hobby array. I'm giving the hobby an ID. There's that 5,000 plus I. So it'll be 5,000, 5,001, 5,002. I'm going to figure out I'm going to pick one of my 3 columns. I have an I. I'm going to divide it by 3 and take the remainder. That % sign is modulo division. You remember modulo division? You divide the first number by the second number and take the remainder. So I'm dividing my I, which goes from 0 to 17. I'm dividing it by 3 and taking the remainder. So the answer is going to be 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. I'm going to my outer linear layout and I'm getting its child, either its 0th child, its 1st child, it's 0 child, it's 1 child, or it's 2 child. And I'm saying, hey, your linear layout. So this is me grabbing one of the linear layouts and this modulo thing is divvying them up between the 3 columns. Here is me adding the checkbox to that column. And then here is adding a listener for that checkbox. So this makes the checkboxes, sets their text, sets their ID, figures out what column they belong in, adds them to that column, gives them a listener. That was fun. Then the rest should be mostly the same. Here's the button. I'm looping through the hobbies. Okay, I loop through the hobbies slightly differently because I'm now index based. So I take my base, which was the 5,000, and I add I, and now I know the ID, and I get the corresponding checkbox, and I ask if it's checked. And if it's checked, I add it to my string. And when the loop is done, if I don't have any hobbies, I say get a hobby. Otherwise, I say here are your hobbies. That's pretty much the same as before. The one thing that changed is now IDs. We now know the IDs of the checkboxes because we gave them their IDs, so we know their IDs. Before, I think we knew their names, and then we had to get from their names, we had to get their IDs. But this time around, since we made them, we know their IDs. So this part was like slightly easier. Down here is my checkbox event. Clear out the answer if they do any checking. Whether they're selecting or whether they're deselecting, it doesn't matter. This event gets called and we clear out. That's version 2. Any questions on version 2? No. Okay. In version 3, the last version of the day, I'm going to get rid of the button, and just as they're checking checkboxes, I will update my list. Okay. So here we go. Version 3 back. Version 3 download. Open everything in Notepad. I think I added a couple of hobbies here, but let's forget about it. We have hobbies. No, let's add them because this will say it doesn't matter. It's going to the number of hobbies. I didn't hard code 18, so now I think it's 21, and it won't matter. It will just be taken care of. Where am I going here? And that was in strings. And so right now it goes down to 21. And now it's going down to 25 or 24. So I've added more hobbies. That won't affect it. It will just adjust because of the way we've written the code. So our code is sort of scalable, they say, that you can just change things without going through and changing it in 5 different places. You change it in one place and it should adapt. Okay, what else is there? The activity main, I've gotten rid of the button, so that's mostly the same, but I got rid of the button. So activity main and code. Okay, no button. There's the linear layout, there's the text view, the button's gone. And the main activity. There's going to be no button clicking, but there's going to be more work in the checkbox checking. Here I am, and in main activity. There I am. I'm going to stop it. I'm going to start it. There should be no button this time. Okay, here is my new list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now there are 21 hobbies. What am I into? Jogging and Pokemon and drawing or something. So it's adding up this list down here, and as I take them away. So that was fun. I could have an if down here that says if you don't have any hobbies, say get a hobby. I didn't do that this time, but I could. The question is slightly different because now it's going to be an array and not, or maybe a list, or maybe a mutable list, or one of those things. But you can still ask a question about it, whether there is anything there or not. It's not the same question as with a string, but there is a question that can be asked. Okay, here we go. So we know it's the same, but no button. There's the 5,000. There are the user's hobbies. Here is a code version of the list, the array of hobbies. Here's the linear layout. Here's the children count, that's 3. Here's me looping through the hobbies, instantiating a checkbox, setting its text, setting its ID, figuring out which column it goes in, adding it to that column, and adding a listener. That's the dynamic part. Complicated because I've added the columns. So all this, just this crazy column stuff. If there were only one column, it would be easier. But it didn't look good to me with just this very long column of hobbies. Okay, here's the listener. Now, before the listener used to just clear, but now the listener has to do more work. So I link to the text view. You remember I have up here, I have an array of hobbies. And so what brings me to the checkbox listener handler is the checking of a box, whether it's selecting or deselecting, any sort of interaction with the checkbox brings me here. And so I'm saying if one of the things that comes in, the button view comes in, which is which button, and is checked. So which checkbox, that's the button view, and did you just check it or did you just uncheck it? So if it's checked, then I'm going to go to the text of the button view, pass it as a string, and add it to my list of hobbies. Otherwise, they've deselected it, and I'm going to remove it from my list of hobbies. So I have this constant array of hobbies. Then I'm either adding to, I'm not looping through now, I'm just adding or taking away the one hobby that was I just interacted with. And then this says, take my array of hobbies, join them together with a separator of a comma and a space. So I think before I just had a space, now I have a comma and a space, because it's easier to join when you're working with an array. And that's that. Let's see what you're supposed to do and then see if there are any questions. So you are supposed to are there still 5 guys? Did they die in the pandemic? Nobody knows. Okay. So you're going to order a burger and maybe some fries. And so you're going to have some little interface. You're going to have some radio buttons to say, do you want a hamburger, a cheeseburger, or a bacon hamburger, or a bacon cheeseburger? How do you want that burger cooked? Do you want it rare, medium, well, or well? You can add medium in there if you want as well. Okay. What do you want on your burger? Do you want mayo, lettuce, pickles? And you're allowed to choose any of these, as many as you want. That's why it's going to be checkboxes. So you choose one burger, that's a radio button. You choose one level of doneness, that's radio buttons. You check any number of toppings, that's checkboxes. You're going to have a lone checkbox. Now I've shown you arrays of checkboxes, set lists, checkbox lists. You're going to, this fry thing is going to be a single checkbox. So if you look inside my loops, you'll see how to handle a single checkbox. Every year, every time I teach this, there's going to be some people who are going to treat it like an array of one checkbox. It's, you don't have to loop through it, there's only one, but people will do that. They'll sort of copy me so blindly that they're not even thinking about it. I'm gonna have a button to order. If you want to take out the button to order and make it more like my last version, that's acceptable, but if it's, so do what you want or what's easier. So I think mine had a button. You're gonna say what they chose. They chose a cheeseburger. They chose medium well. They said they wanted lettuce, pickles, tomatoes. And then you're going to determine the price. Hamburgers are $6.19, cheeseburgers $6.89, and then blah blah. And if they want fries, it's another $3.75, which is a lot for fries. So that is the game. That's what you're supposed to make. So are there questions for the recording? I'll pick that as a no. So stop recording.